Good morning, everybody. Our first speaker this morning is Walter Torres. In response to my request of how he would like to be introduced, he provided the following description of his professional development. The caption below his high school graduation picture of 1966 read, "Ambition, clinical psychologist." He began his training as a psychologist in 1972 under Peter Soria. His influence and that of Dorothy Wergen, a secretary at Munzinger, who was a professional astrologer, were providentially placed in his path. He completed his internship at Massachusetts General Hospital, where he encountered the strain of being a descriptive psychologist in a community that was limited to psychoanalytic thought. The strain of that experience was eventually illuminating, namely on how to be a spy in enemy territory. With no personal or academic knowledge of substance abuse or addiction, he began working in an inpatient unit in 1981, at the time when recovery communities such as AA began to interact with clinical professional communities. He fell in love with the treatment of addictions, discovering what is necessary to achieve changes in ways of life and the dramatic benefits that can arise from doing so. He later discovered the world of injured workers and the strange statuses into which they fall. In that context, he witnessed up close the devastating effect of humiliation. He was asked to present at the society in response to that demand. He developed a descriptive formulation of humiliation. He and Ray Bergner published two papers on it, one pertaining to the formulation, the other to the treatment of the humiliated. Both papers are very well received, but the public demonstration of the formulation needs some further work to better establish their power and utility. Due to some other happenstances, he has worked a great deal in treating troubled physicians. He is presently semi-retired and trying to sort out the confusion that arises from this change of status. He has much to be grateful for, both professionally and personally. The title of his presentation is "What's Going On Between Clarence Thomas and Humiliation? An Analysis of Opinions, Actions, and Personal History with the assistance of the four-ingredient model of humiliation." Here's Walter.
Just get to that here. Okay. Well, good morning. I thought that we would just review very quickly what I'm now calling the four-ingredient model of humiliation. With the psychology and which Ray and I worked. The individual makes a claim or bid to a social condition or put otherwise to a certain status. The claim may be a new one or an ongoing one. You can read this stuff there. The claim or bid is rejected.
A little louder, Walter, please.
I'm sorry?
A little louder, please.
Because I'm thinking I'm speaking loud, fairly loudly. Yeah, the audio can sit up.
It's a little bit muddy on Zoom. I'm sorry to say, it's hard to understand. For me, at least.
Yeah, several of those.
Let's see if that helps. The claim or bid is rejected or is publicly characterized as failing. I want to backtrack here and give an example of each ingredient. Individual makes a claim. An individual applies for a job at XYZ Corporation. The claim or bid is rejected or is publicly characterized as failing. Individual gets a letter that says that he did not get the job. The claim is rejected by an individual or individuals with the necessary status to effectively reject the claim, or the claim fails in a way that's recognizable to the community. So the letter is from the employer that he applied to, who obviously has the status to effectively reject his claim. The status to have claimed the status to have made the claim in the first place is also rejected. And here what happens is that the corporation did not just say, thank you for applying for this job. There were many qualified applicants. We regret to inform you that you were not selected. Wishing you the best in your professional endeavors, etc. No, the letter did not say that. The letter said, given your ridiculously inadequate qualifications, we can't believe you even applied for this job. What were you thinking? When I have presented this last example, and I've been talking to graduate students, I gave it as an example as an application to an internship, and you saw them almost fall off the chair. Okay, so this will be a backdrop that we may allude to a couple of times throughout the presentation. Leola Williams, the mother of Clarence Thomas, lived a hard life. She was born illegitimate. Her mother died in childbirth when she was only 3. Her father did not want to care for her, so he sent her to Pinpoint, Georgia, to be brought up by a strict maternal aunt. She kept her from playing with other children, forced her to keep house, and as Leola put it, was real hard on me. At age 12, Leola got her first real doll, only to have him taken away as punishment by her aunt. 4 years later, she became pregnant, dropped out of school. While still a teenager, she had her second child and first son, Clarence. They lived in a rough wooden shack equipped with kerosene lamps and an outhouse. Not long after the birth of Clarence came a second boy. When the children were still what Leola called hand babies, requiring constant care, their father deserted them. They lived in a poor, nearly subsistence level community that was nonetheless highly traditional, where desertion and illegitimacy were unusual. Leola would recount that the children never stopped asking her, why'd he do it? Why'd he leave? A black journalist who came to know Thomas fairly well told one author, what whites don't realize is that he starts out as a little black boy, not accepted in the black world. He has no money, no family. This puts him at the bottom of the pecking order among Southern blacks, a community that is far more closed-minded and rigid than many whites imagine. As soon as he was born, he was just out there, a floater. Abandonment was a recurring theme in Thomas's family. His grandfather, Myers Anderson, a figure that Thomas has lionized, had been abandoned by his father and found the desertion so painful that he refused ever to speak to him. And he, at a young age, had abandoned Thomas's mother, Leola. At the age of 6, Clarence and his brother accidentally set the house on fire and it burned to the ground, leaving the family destitute. His mother took the children to live in a squalid one-room apartment with a shared outdoor toilet. Ultimately, she found the conditions too much to bear and begged her biological father to help. According to Leola, he was strongly opposed to doing it. But also according to Leola, Anderson's wife threatened to leave him if he didn't help with the grandchildren, and finally, he agreed. Thomas's account of how he came under the care of his grandfather differs. He had told a number of people over the years that she had become romantically involved with a man who had no interest in taking on her children, so she resorted to dumping him and his brother on the grandfather because she met some man. So by the age of 7, Clarence Thomas had been abandoned by both parents. A frequent observation of women who encountered Thomas as an adult, young adult, was that he still seemed very angry at his mother. His grandfather, Myers Anderson, had not gone beyond the 3rd grade, but was endowed with intelligence and an iron will. His work habits were legendary, and his success, given his limited means, were remarkable. By all accounts, Thomas's grandfather was an exceedingly stern taskmaster, determined to teach his grandsons the value of hard work, but strongly disinclined to provide affection or even conversation. Thomas had told several colleagues at Yale Law School that his grandfather rarely spoke to him as a boy, other than to order him to do some chore. A Yale Law School colleague was surprised by Thomas's exaltation of his grandfather during the confirmation hearings. In school, he talked about how hard his grandfather had been on him, physically and otherwise, specifically mentioning that if he and his brother so much as overslept, they'd have the shit beaten out of them. There were numerous depictions of his grandfather as exceedingly harsh, demanding, and punitive. A favorite saying of his was, "Hard times make monkey eat cayenne pepper." The Catholic school into which he placed Thomas was also about being submissive to authority, often through physical punishment. The simple act of questioning a biblical story, a witness said, could result in severe punishment. This witness, she had attended that school and she later became an anthropologist. But clearly, his grandfather took Thomas's education very seriously. Roy Allen, a Georgia state senator and supporter of Thomas and a classmate of his at the parochial school, emphasized that Thomas did not grow up poor. His grandfather had been very successful in business, but he acknowledged that the grandfather made them work so hard that he used to joke that Clarence had already personally lived through slavery. As explained in a speech, Thomas portrayed that honesty, hard work, and discipline had been the only means of his survival. Quote, "These are the things my grandparents and the nuns pushed, which I hated, but which worked. But for them, God knows where I would be, probably dead." The message was, you do it on your own, get the job done, no excuses. If there is anything you get of value from others, it is that demand that you be undaunted by hardship. The kindness of others, don't even think about it. And the formula worked for him. Later, there was Yale Law School. He became Assistant Secretary of Civil Rights at the Department of Education during the Reagan administration and was chairman of the EEOC from 1982 to 1990 during both the Reagan and Bush administrations. I made a mistake. I wanted to show you some examples of humiliation, and here's a very important one. That's right, and it illustrates how even a slight humiliation leaves an enduring sting. And it can be as mild as this, or as severe as this. And far worse than
When you hit the X on that box of the page, you see the box where it says participant is, and enable closed captioning, hit the X there. There you go. There you go.
far worse than the physical suffering whose urgency fades from memory are the affronts to human dignity. Those wounds, it seems, do not heal. As a chemist, Levy is drafted into a squad of skilled workers for the rubber factory. He must pass an oral examination administered by a Dr. Panwitz, tall, thin, blonde. Panwitz looks at him. It is a look, Levy tells us, that did not pass between two men. Earlier, after a comparable incident, he had felt as if I had never in all my life suffered a more atrocious insult, that of being treated as a beast. Now, he says, if I knew how to explain fully the nature of that look, exchanged as if through the glass wall of an aquarium between two beings who inhabit different worlds, I would also be able to explain the essence of the great insanity of the third life. The mere status claim of being a person here is being denied. Like I'm not
The
getting
arrow on the keyboard, the right arrow on the keyboard.
Oh, that's better. Okay, I'm gonna leave this one up there for now. Thomas was ambitious. He had spoken of gaining a seat in the Supreme Court long before any such option was remotely available as an actuality. Although often stilted and reserved in formal presentations and often seen as bitter and intolerant of dissent, he possessed significant dramatic flair and capacity for charisma. He assumed the position of head of EEOC during the Reagan and Bush administrations that had little interest in the goals of that agency. The Reagan White House in particular would shut down his initiatives, the message being along the lines of you're here as a figurehead, don't think we're going to take your thoughts and initiatives seriously. And at the other end, African Americans attacked him as an Uncle Tom and a traitor. Thurgood Marshall retires from the court, replacing him with another black man who happens to be a staunch conservative is a delectable, irresistible option. He was presented as the best man for the job, irrespective of race. Anita Hill, a reserved, exceedingly polite, and very pretty attorney who had attended Yale, who had worked for him 8 years earlier, who had reluctantly spoken to others of his sexually harassing her through insistent and coarse behavior. After much ambivalence and seemingly endless deliberation, decided to come forward with accusations of sexual harassment. The accusations arose into full prominence when he was in the process of review by the Senate Judiciary Committee. Given the ages of the people that I see here, you probably know the content of her allegations. She stated that he had persisted insistently in wanting to date her while he was her superior, and that after her rejection of him, he resorted to unwanted, highly explicit, and coarse references to sex. He spoke of pornography, he spoke of his sexual prowess, of his phallus, and much more. The content of the accusations was plainly disqualified. His behavior would come and go. There were times when it would be very active, and then times where it would seem to back off for an extended period of time and then would return, is what she describes. Her testimony here at for the Senate Judiciary Committee was calm, articulate, and detailed. And in the open market of presentations, I'd say it was a convincing statement describing him as having sexually abused her. But as anyone who's been in a legal proceeding with skilled lawyers and other skilled actors, much else can follow that can change the views on that which had seemed straightforward, plain, and convincing. The undermining of her credibility was artfully executed, both by Thomas during the hearings, by the very skilled Republican senators on the committee, and afterwards by the campaigns of those who interacted with the press. The Democratic senators were largely bewildered, withheld, and ineffectual. They lacked the resolve to do the necessary job. By the end of the hearings, the public polls found that a majority of the public no longer believed Anita Hill. Characterizations involving fantasizer, spurned woman, erotomania, and various other depictions and stage settings undermined her credibility and won the day. So what we have here is ingredient 3. The claim is rejected by an individual. She was rejecting his claim, number 2. But number 3 is the claim is rejected by an individual with the necessary status to effectively reject the claim. And here, this condition of humiliation was no longer being met. In fact, it was not met. She was disqualified. Thomas evaded a devastating humiliation. He would not have been rejected due to a philosophical difference on interpreting and applying the law. He would have been rejected because of an a priori gross deficiency of character. Essentially, number 4, the status to have claimed the status to begin with would have also been rejected. And it would have been a humiliation of lifelong consequence. In 2015, the Supreme Court issued a ruling in Obergefell versus Hodges that the fundamental right to marry is guaranteed to same-sex couples by both the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause. In its ruling, it alluded to and relied on the notion of dignity. It alluded to some problematic laws the Supreme Court majority stated. These classifications denied the equal dignity of men and women. One state's law, for example, provided in 1971 that the husband is the head of the family and the wife is subject to him. Her legal civil existence is merged in the husband, except so far as the law recognizes her separately, either for her own protection or for her benefit. Responding to a new awareness, the court invoked equal protection principles to invalidate laws imposing sex-based inequality in marriage. And later, in its opinion, when addressing the situation of homosexual couples, it stated, their hope is not to be condemned to live in loneliness, excluded from one of civilization's oldest institutions. They ask for equal dignity in the eyes of the law.
Walter, 24-minute mark?
I'm sorry?
24-minute mark?
So the situation depicted is where one party is denied its equal, shall we say, deservedness. And the court is taking a measure to correct that. Thomas, in his dissent, takes issue with this line of thinking. He states, the majority goes to great lengths to assert that this decision will advance the dignity of same-sex couples. The flaw in that reasoning, of course, is that the Constitution contains no dignity clause, and even if it did, the government would be incapable of bestowing dignity. Human dignity has long been understood in this country to be innate. When the framers proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, they referred to a vision of mankind in which all humans are created in the image of God and therefore of inherent worth. That vision is the foundation upon which this nation was built. It goes on. The corollary of that principle is that human dignity cannot be taken away by the government. I want to emphasize that this is in response to the opinion by the court in which they are saying that these individuals, the women in Georgia whose legal identity was merged into the husband, and the homosexual couples who cannot claim access to marriage. In response to that, he says, the corollary of that principle is that human dignity cannot be taken away by the government. Slaves did not lose their dignity any more than they lost their humanity because the government allowed them to be enslaved. Those held in internment camps did not lose their dignity because the government confined them. And those denied governmental benefits certainly do not lose their dignity because the government denied them those benefits. The government cannot bestow dignity and it cannot take it away. I'm going to show his statement there. Thomas is speaking of dignity as an inherent quality. There is a tradition for doing so in legal philosophy. We might redescribe his reference to dignity as an inherent deservedness. It exists for Thomas from the status assignment of none other than God, the ultimate status assigner. You can't beat that one. You can't supersede or undermine that one. If we take away God, we might come up with something akin to it, merely by looking at the fact that the human person comes with inherent basic human needs. If you're going to have a human person at all, its basic needs are to be met. The person deserves this by the very nature of things. The person is understood to need, deserve, to be treated as a person by the community. So there's nothing peculiar about asserting that we are endowed with inherent dignity, inherent deservedness. In fact, the person who believes this to his core may be strikingly resistant to humiliation. But in fact, that the majority does not claim to be bestowing dignity. Rather, it is removing denials and violations of it and addressing the injury that resulted. So it actually aligns itself with the notion of an inherent a priori deservedness. All men are created equal with unalienable rights, as we presently understand them. Thomas asserts that the individual who has been treated below their deserved status, such as the women in Georgia, or the homosexual individuals who cannot accord their relationship a status of marriage, could not have suffered a loss of their inherent dignity as a result of their unequal protection. Okay? But he equates that to it being impossible for them to have suffered a violation or denial of their inherent dignity or deserved status, and are thus ineligible to obtain relief on that basis. Dignity is God-given, inherent, immutable, and inviolable. You say that someone subjected you to an indignity? No, that could not have happened. The dignity is God-given, it cannot be affected by man. And he treats that as the end of the story. The majority, on the other hand, acts with the underlying understanding that in the playing field in which lives are lived, God is not the only status assigner who can uplift or demean us. Our inherent dignity does not make us immune to degradation or to deprivation of our deserved status. Thomas seems to delete other humans as status assigners in this domain and treats any of their actions and effects from those actions as null and void. He tells us that no one can suffer any injury that may arise from any such actions. It's a strange thing to do. It replaces and annuls the world of humans effectively assigning to status to other humans when it comes to affirming, uplifting, or undermining, degrading, or violating the deserved status of another human. It's rather like he changes the topic. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the locution of dignity. And of course, it's best understood by its various uses. A commonly acted upon understanding of dignity is along the lines of what people describe as a double negative. And looking at references to dignity, references to dignity, most are embedded in a context where a degradation looms as a possibility, such as he kept his dignity. My wife and I have a running joke about our dignity pause. When we've been at a restaurant for about an hour, hour and a half, sometimes longer, but we're with friends, we've been seated there for a long time. And when it's time to get up, if you arise from the chair and start walking right away, it's very likely that you're going to be looking something along like this when you begin walking. And so what we do is we stand from the chair, we arise from the chair, and we stand there, and we allow our ligaments to align. And then we proceed. That was our dignity pause. So the references to dignity in this context seem to represent the successful maintenance of a deserved status in the face of its potential loss. What is it for someone to be subjected to an indignity? It's a situation when someone has been treated in a way that violates their deserved status, often through an undeserved humiliation or simply a deprivation of their deserved status. What is it to act in violation of one's own dignity. It's when we might say to someone, you are better than that. Essentially, it all pertains to individuals being treated below their deserved status. It's not difficult to envision scenarios of this sort. We can envision mild scenarios of this. We can envision horrific versions of this. Thomas's allusion to slavery certainly brings many instances of the horrific kind to mind. It's peculiar that Thomas focuses on one context for speaking of dignity that makes it impossible to speak of the effects of someone being submitted to an indignity or a remedy for that. Many years ago, I was in a group therapy session, and I was leading a group therapy session. Whenever we would say something that we thought would be of value to this woman, be it supportive or confrontational, she would begin to speak of her relationship to God. And it always trumped what we had to say. I pointed out to her that you seem to have this direct line between you and God, and you treat it like it's all that matters. Our reactions to you, our thoughts on your behalf, all fall by the wayside, like they don't mean anything. We can't reach you. It's all between you and God, and the rest of us are walled off like nobodies. I remember the flavor of the moment very vividly. She was a good woman, kind at heart. She looked very stunned and pained. She did not want to be putting anybody down. She did not want to be treating us like nobodies. The significance of what I said reached her, and the following day, she sought me out to thank me. The majority are speaking of supporting dignity, remedying defilements of it that are occurring in the playing field of human social relationships. Thomas gives no recognition to that field, and in effect supplants it with the playing field between us and God. End of story. There is no such thing as an effect or an injury that could arise from the relationship with other persons. Kind of like that, what the woman in that group was doing. Thomas had a different way of going about this matter on October 11th, 1991. Anita Hill's accusation had been devastating to him. A credible observer stated that he was so emotionally stripped that he was sometimes crouched in a fetal position. His wife described him to Senator Danforth, who was supporting him, as having gotten out of bed during the night and lain writhing on the floor in agony until nearly dawn. According to Michael Ludig, who many of us know as a conservative luminary judge, the luminary conservative judge Ludig, for his denunciation of Donald Trump as a malignant threat to democracy, described him as crying and hyperventilating, just waiting that these people have destroyed my life. After her testimony, he was bereft and said to several people that he did not think he would make it. Orrin Hatch, the senator from Utah, gave him a firm talking to, prompted him to rise to the occasion with astute strategies to counter the accusation, and he is credited with having brought Thomas back to life. So while his anguish was enormous, he mustered a ferocious determination to launch an all-out last-ditch campaign to win. He then showed a combativeness that rang true to his old friends and relatives. In his rebuttal, he bellowed that the entire proceeding was a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks. He brought out the race card and victimization to the race. Quote, "It is a message that unless you kowtow to an old order, this is what will happen to you. You will be lynched, destroyed, caricatured by a committee of the US Senate rather than hung from a tree." He stated he would quote, refuse to provide the rope for my own lynching or for further humiliation. Thus, he would not tolerate discussion of, quote, what goes on in the intimate parts of my private life or the sanctity of my bedroom. He stated, "I'm not here to be further humiliated by this committee or to put my private life on display for prurient reasons or other reasons. I have never in all my life felt such hurt, such pain, such agony." In short, he characterized the accusation and the process as a gross indignity. So when it came to his pain at the prospect of his indignity, presumably being violated, he treated it as a case of dignity being violated. That was real and dreadful and to be fought at all costs. And whereas he alleges that the government cannot violate, undermine, or restore someone's dignity, a mere woman and her testimony put his dignity under severe jeopardy. It's interesting that the word dignity was used 18 times in these proceedings. One of its uses pertained to inherent dignity afforded to us in the context of natural law, such as he spoke of in his opinion. The 17 other uses were applied in the ordinary way that it is used, as a variable factor in the field of human relationships. Anita Hill is congratulated for the dignity she maintained, parenthesis, in the face of potential degradation. He was congratulated for the dignity he maintained in the face of potential degradation. And witnesses supporting him spoke of him always having supported the dignity of the women who worked for him. That is, he never treated them below their station. He does not use the term once, but he speaks English and understands the common usage of the term enacted upon this understanding. Of course, he knows that when people are speaking of dignity, as the majority spoke of it in its opinion, they are speaking of insults to a deserved status, and that there is such a thing as incurring a painful injury from such insults, and that such a thing as countering, and that there is such a thing as countering and remedying the effects of those insults. Why would he do that? Why would he have done that? In October 1991, he is at the edge of suffering a massive humiliation and a gross insult to his dignity. In Obergefell versus Hodges, he tells us that dignity can never be lost or infringed upon by the government, otherwise known as we the people. When it came to himself defending his dignity, it was akin to a life and death battle. When it comes to others, LGBTQ in particular, or the women in Georgia, the matter of their dignity and its recognition and respect does not even qualify as a subject. Thomas exhorts us to believe that the woman who is repeatedly raped by her purported owner cannot claim the injury of infringement on dignity, that the husband of that wife cannot do so either, and that the government that knowingly permits this has utterly no responsibility for the injury arising from the infringement on their dignity. It was a peculiarly concrete misapplication of the word. He should know better. It's reasonable to suspect that he does know better. As I said, he speaks English. And when others were speaking of dignity maintained during the proceeding in 1991, he understood what they were saying. But we might ask, is this due to a conservative orientation? A conservative orientation de-emphasizes injury and pain and victimization and focuses more on doing what's necessary. It's an immensely important perspective in our society. But he goes far further than that. He disappears the injury and the pain. He walks past it like it ain't there. The way he responds in Obergefell displays a strange conceptual rigidity, a concreteness. It's obtuse. When someone does that, you might ask, what is the deficit here? And what is he doing by doing this? I'll start with the latter and end with the former. One thing he achieves is that he steers us away from recognizing, speaking of, and addressing suffering of those who have endured insults to their deserved status. Why would he do that? I have some, hypotheses. The first one I'll call me not hurt, me not ever hurt. During his childhood, injury, pain, hurt had no significant standing as facts. They mattered not at all to his grandfather as such. They mattered only as motivators to perform and to do what was necessary. It's what Skinner termed negative reinforcement. Hard times make monkeys eat cayenne pepper. The extent to which injury and pain mattered on a private basis could only elicit more pain and bewilderment or confused resentment, given the absence of either recognition or of care directed for the injury and the pain. What's the point of speaking of insignificant facts or facts that will be treated by all around as insignificant? To speak of his injury and pain in any plaintive way would have been to assume an impossible position. It would not be recognized as meriting care, if at all, and to the extent that it would be recognized, he would be punished quite severely for having spoken of it. To express injury and pain as a reason for remedial care would have been a challenge to his grandfather's authority and to defy his status as the arbiter of what mattered. His grandfather had relented in agreeing to take them. He was not about to relent on his principles for raising them. Hence, Thomas's strange avoidance of the realm where injury and pain are recognized as such may derive from a stance akin to that of me not poor, but rather me not hurt, me not ever hurt. A dissociation, and I use the term in the usual clinical way, from the status of hurt and probably the status of humiliated. The topic falls off into the realm of the unthinkable, and here the dissociation. Another hypothesis derives from the previous. He came perilously close to suffering a devastating humiliation as he showed us. But for the successful, artfully crafted public invalidation of his critic and rejecter, such that ingredient 3 was not met, he would have suffered a profound, potentially permanent public humiliation, where ingredient 3 and 4 would have been met. However, if the invalidation of his rejecter critic was unsound, that is, if he harbors thoughts that she had a valid criticism, the potential for a successful humiliation may haunt him, yielding a stance that renders the potential for humiliation and loss of dignity unthinkable, and giving rise to strangely crafted invalidations of its potential to occur anywhere, anytime.
Walter, 45-minute point?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
There are other potential frameworks as to why he would do this. They are plainly pejorative, and I don't want to give that much focus here, especially if I don't know that for sure. And I don't want to be simply shaking my fist at him or simply condemning him. But there is another hypothesis that arises while we're at it, while we're thinking about this. As his childhood is described, getting something for free was not an option, much less a legitimate option. A scenario such as, hey, guess what I brought you kids? What? Ice cream, yay. That kind of scenario was not a visionable scenario, unless he saw it happen maybe at a friend's house. What he celebrates getting from his grandfather and the nuns is what he hated at the time. The demand, the requirement that he tolerate and perform in the face of adversity and hardship. The more of it, the better. And there are instances of that with his grandfather. The more of it, the better. No complaints. Further, the non-recognition of injury and hurt and the absence of tending to it as such is formulated by him as what saved him and led to success. What we have here is that he celebrates growing up in a never-ending boot camp. So, the deprivation and prohibition of ever getting something for free may have generated what? Can you think of anything? I'm gonna say it again. The deprivation and prohibition of ever getting something for free may have generated is accepting gifts in an inappropriate way. While a Supreme Court justice. The deprivation of and prohibition of ever getting something for free from a father figure may have generated the predicament that is revealed by the recent exposures. It's kind of like what happens to individuals who grow up in fundamentalist families that are sternly prohibitive toward anything remotely sexual. They are prone to secretive, unintegrated outbursts of sexual conduct later in life. So my advice to Clarence Thomas would be that he extend the range of his peripheral vision to that which he was kept sloughed off beyond it. His childhood hurt, and his deprivation of nurturance. That he give legitimacy to the word ouch that resides within him, and the care that the word should call for. He would be a better human and a better judge.
We've got 11 minutes.
11 minutes, okay.
Yeah. Well done.
We can take a nap.
I'm not asking you to take it out. It strikes me this is almost a transformation, an extreme one of for no more. I'm trying to live a life of no deprivation. Right, so much so that, you know, you can't get there. Hopefully, it becomes so close in some ways. You almost, you can admire
Yes.
the perseverance of the guy trying to live this. It's ultimately a tragedy.
Yeah, and well, when you speak of it that way, it's also not living under a regime
Right,
of rules that are absolutely inviolable and unquestionable.
right.
We've got Wynn online with his hand up. Go ahead, Wynn.
Hey, Walter, brilliant presentation. I don't actually buy the last piece. I think the man simply is an opportunist at that final page, and he made good. But I think you did something really, I think, interesting in focusing on the notion of dignity. Thomas, is one of the original figures of the current 5-member originalists on the court. The people that are all sort of collectively more aligned with a particular brand of right libertarianism and reactionary forms from the Federalist Society. But that the notion of being an originalist is extraordinarily important for Thomas and for his crew, originalists of the Constitution. The irony, and this is an irony-free court, is that the word dignity, most etymologies will put it having a history that starts with the Latin, moving towards French and into Old English. The original notion of the term is simply being worthy. It's being of worth, being worthy. And
I'll include their deservedness.
yes. But the basic notion is worth, is being worthy, being, amongst us as a worthy member. And that's the original term. I just found the focus on the different meanings there, on that absence of the subtlety, the absence of irony, the horse shit. It just stinks. And just a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
As I was thinking, just when you ended, it seems like he re-described his life as I was never really deprived. And then he made a secondary move. And in fact, there's actually no such thing as deprivation. Does that sound right?
Well, yes, that's why I'm qualifying it as a dissociation.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And by the way, it was just 2 days ago that I came upon that notion that he grew up in boot camp
Yeah, I like that, that is a great image.
and he celebrates it and
Uh,
treats it as the necessary, it's advisable.
Well, every Marine who gets out of boot camp is very proud of it.
Exactly. The difference being unending.
Yeah.
And the difference also being what context are you in? Yes, well, we all go through boot camp. I thought my first semester of graduate school felt like boot camp. It may have been a figment of you, but that's what it felt like. And we all need to go through a boot camp, but not an unending one. Not the paradigm case for your relationship with those who presumably love you and care for you. Again, you don't get to say ouch much in boot camp.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else online? Other questions, comments, reactions?
I have just a question, because in your presentation, you haven't, I don't explicitly mentioned race, other than sort of the general socioeconomic context of his early life and his own identifications or disidentifications with being, African American man. How do you integrate that piece of his existence?
Well, again, if you just start out as a conservative, he's going to underemphasize that component of victimization, etc., and emphasize what you can do. That's fair play. It's an important perspective. It's very valuable. But he goes far further than that. And the number of his opinions in which he just annuls injury and the effects of the injury are, I mean, he's rampant and hugely known for that. And he does it in the kind of way that he does it over here, by misapplying some framework that makes it null and void, not a topic. So when it comes to race, he is likely to, and to underemphasize that. And again, I'm going to say that can be an important contribution in many contexts, but he goes far further than that. However, during the hearings, and this is what, by the way, Orrin Hatch advised him to do, to bring out the race card. There was nothing here about this being a lynching toward an uppity black. These were accusations that merited very serious consideration, and they weren't delivered by a crackpot. Now, there's another context also that he may claim race and the minority status and the particular experience of African Americans is that he may say, boot camp is what we need to get through. But by the way, some of his friends say, my parents, they who were successful and came out of that context and who went to that pro-care school said, my parents treated me good. I came out with self-esteem. He didn't have self-esteem. It was, he was bitter, angry, constrained, etc. So again, if boot camp is all you know, that's what he's going to celebrate. And especially if given the unthinkability of getting something for free or the unthinkability of pain and injury being respected and treated kindly, he's going to treat this as the thing to do and the thing for all Blacks to endure or to act upon in this sort of way in relationship to the world to succeed.
We have two questions from those in Zoom. Martin?
Yeah, thank you very much for this brilliant presentation, Walter. There is so much to talk about here. I just have a question which is kind of back to basics to make sure that I haven't misunderstood anything. I see humiliation then as a special form of degradation, and I wonder whether it is correct of me to understand the model that you presented as something that can be mapped onto the conditions of a successful degradation ceremony, or is that the relation between the two? Or
the degradation ceremony is woven into this as we allude to it some in our first paper. So yes, but again, it's a particular kind of degradation here. That final step, that there is a disqualification of the status to claim a status, is where people are left speechless and as nobodies in the domain in which the rejection took place.
We got a couple of minutes left.
You might look at the papers; they're informative in that respect.
Yeah, a couple of minutes left, so let's hopefully do two more questions. One from Carolyn, and then second from Wynn. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, no, I just want to point out that what Walter just did is a beautiful example of individual case formulation. You know, not claiming it must be this, he must be like that, it must be whatever, but to look at a particular person's life history to make sense out of what's going on and saying, well, maybe that's what it is. Recognizing you're not in a position to, really make a final statement about that. That's all.
Even when you're in the same room. Yes.
I'll have, I think lastly, Wynn.
Hey, Walter, one just quick kind of comment and thought. The humiliation clearly connects to certain feelings of being caught as a transgressor. Racial and class transgressions, especially in certain aspects of this country, are seen as especially important transgressions. Sexual transgressions, coupled with Catholicism, coupled with his background, coupled with an interracial marriage, all of these sorts of features create a kind of climate of the transgressor who needs in some fashion to experience some immunity. And I think what you've built is a model to this notion of treating this all as boot camp. And so my question is, the sexual transgression, I think in and of itself is something that for a conservative, a Black man in a conservative background from a Catholic community is likely to have tremendous difficulties modulating in his own experience. And that line of development, I think, may be as significant as the issue of money. I think money has its own powers. But the transgression issue, I think, is important.
The sexual transgression is, the ramifications of that, both in relationship to his history and to his claimed statuses, is immensely complex. And it is really a bat that breaks it all up. It breaks up the statuses that he claims. So yeah, conservative, Catholic, and rule abiding, etc. Anita Hill claims that in their last dinner, he before she was leaving town, he said to her simply, if you make public any of those events, it'll ruin my career. That he simply stated that.
Could you say that again, Walter? I couldn't hear you.
That Anita Hill claims that during their last dinner, He simply said to her out of the blue, if you make public some of those facts about what I did, I don't know what words he used, but that's what he was saying. If you make public some of the facts of how I behaved towards you, it will ruin my career.
He said it will ruin my career?
Yeah, it will ruin his career, yes.
Oh, so he wasn't threatening to ruin her career?
No, no, and she does not make any claim to that.
Our time is up. Thank you, Dr. Torres. I look forward to your analysis of bread common on for next year.